welcome to all of you and the panel. First of all, I'm Malati. I'm not Shamla Rajaram, last minute change on the moderator. So I may be a little shaky, but I hope it'll be okay. Let's begin at the very beginning and let's listen your origin story and what drew you to this topic of gender equity.
That's a broad question, Malti, and we'll try and answer it succinctly so we don't bore the audience and drag on our stories. My journey actually around this began when I was 16 years old, and I had the privilege of very liberal parents who allowed me to leave home on my own, go abroad to study for 11th and 12th standard. At that time, it was nearly unheard of, and I still remember my mum saying, "Oh my goodness, what am I going to do?" And she told me later, years later, that the day I got married was the day she finally felt that she'd made the right decision. And I don't understand that to this day, but that's how she characterized it. Over the years, I've had the privilege of opportunities that allow me to grow professionally. At the same time, be close to home. So I moved back from the United States about 14 years ago to be with family in Chennai, and have had the privilege of professional opportunities in the city that allow me to balance what I hold dear, family, along with doing something meaningful and having impact. And I think the single best decision of my life is who I married. Not the individual, but so much the family that I married into. And I think that extended family and that community that I lean on every day is what brings me to work and to this panel today.
So let me not try to compete with such a wonderful way of sharing. Bhavana Bindra, so just giving the introduction again, I guess we forget names otherwise. I'll tell you a little bit on my story. So come from a nuclear family, northern part of the country, coincidentally left home at the same age, actually was pushed to leave home because people believed I had more potential than I thought I had, and then the small town that I had been brought up in would allow me to flower with. So I was pushed, and that was the beginning of a journey, and never really got back home after that. I started my career with consulting. So I was with the Boston Consulting Group after my MBA at IIM Bangalore. And certain personal reasons got me moving into a city called Pune. All of us hopefully know that. And I joined the manufacturing space after consulting. This was almost 20 years ago. And I was a specimen over there. My gender, my qualification, my age, everything seemed to be like this was a specimen. And to begin with, they didn't know what to do with me. Of course, there was certain visionary leadership that thought there was something that could make a difference there. And that was the journey of an organization that I was part of. From 7% women in the workforce to 30% plus in a matter of 15 years. I was there with them 13 out of those 15. And yes, the specimen kind of grew. It was my journey, and right from grassroots, because I joined at a very low level in the organization and then went on to head some of their businesses. And for me, I think I have had a lot of support at home to make this happen, both morally, emotionally, mentally, physically, everything. So my parents, so I have a teenage daughter, and when she was born, my parents knew I would not want to leave her and go anywhere. So they locked their house and they said, "We'll support you. You go and do what you need to do." And I think that's been a blessing for me. Also a lot of the value system that I gained from them. And then came a spouse who believed in pushing the envelope at every instance and questioning status quo. And that is what kind of encouraged me to take the path less taken, as I put it. And I think it's my desire that because I had the support and the confidence that came with that support to make it happen, hopefully there can be some more whom I can support with to make it happen. So that's a little bit of my story.
We'll wait for Suresh to join us. We're going around and talking about what brought us into this space. So it's my turn. So you've come right on time. Thank you for coming right on time to listen to me. I'm extremely privileged, absolutely entitled, and I echo what Bhavana said about, it's in this space possibly not for myself. I come from a family of teachers and professors. We are two sisters, and I never felt for a single moment when I was growing up that I had to be any less than any of the guys. Checked my humility out at the door, so I'll tell you I was topping my class all through school, including in the engineering entrance in my state and so on. So I had, in terms of what I could study at college, all the options that were possible to be available within the country were open to me. I studied here in IIT Madras. I came as a very tiny little 17-year-old to this lovely, beautiful campus that you all have seen. I was 5%, women were 5% of the class at that point of time. And there was immediately, as soon as we entered the classes, a little bit of feeling of, maybe you don't belong so much over here. Maybe engineering is mechanical engineering. I studied chemical engineering, but mechanical engineering, chemical engineering are maybe not so much for you. I was abroad for the rest of my studies. I was in the beautiful land, United States, land of toilet and tissue paper. It did not get any better. The numbers wise, I did grad school several years at the University of Massachusetts. I was maybe 7-8% of the population were women over there. I went on to MIT to do my postdoc, and numbers wise, it got a little bit better. Opportunity wise, definitely a lot better. But in terms of that feeling one has about, maybe sticking out a little bit like a sore thumb, a specimen, so to speak, was always there. I've been back here as faculty at IIT Bombay and IIT Madras, still sitting at 10% of the population in 2023. We've inched up to 12% now, I think, at maybe this calendar year, by making some very intelligent hires in the recent past. I'm also very happy that I'm sitting here in 2023, 10, maybe 12% of the population. Things are very unequal, unequitable, all that is definitely true, but we are conscious of it. And I'm happy to call out my PhD scholar, Ms. Vani, who's sitting here, who's studying the language that is there in the campus in terms of how gender biased or not biased it is. I think we're a little bit clear on what the outcome is going to be. But I think this is important, this space, because I think it is really vital, really critical, and it's not about me, my experiences, etc., but something well beyond that. Happy to be on this panel. Thank you, Malati.
What a round of great introduction. So very nice to start off with that question of what drew you to gender equity, and we have the toughest question for you, Suresh, because you came late. Okay, in the company side of things, what is it that these companies care about in terms of gender equity, equality, and why should they care about it? Your thoughts.
So I was just hearing Preeti talk. I come to talk about a few specific things, which I think, thanks to Sylvia, I got a chance to come here and address all of you. So I was really sitting on the other side. We had 2 girls in the class of 35. I also studied here at IIT Madras. So I sort of was recollecting all of those during my grad studies, and I think the percentages from what I saw was a wee bit even lower than some of what she mentioned. But let me not dwell there. So from a company's perspective, the question you asked. So I'll probably take a few minutes to give a fairly multifaceted reply to this. I think as somebody who runs a company, promoted businesses, I can tell you this much from whatever I have seen based on my interactions is, and I'm not sure elsewhere in the world, but from an Indian context, it's seen because of a lot of pressure, regulatory wise, people are trying to comply in terms of so many women directors in the board. Now it's starting to become recommended, very soon mandatory for all companies. So people are trying to comply with regulations. Some of them think it is good to be seen as being on the right side of this. So I see a set of companies who are doing it because they want to be seen in the right side of things. People have now started talking about, how many women do they have, percentage of women to men in the employment roles of the company. But people are all doing it not for the right reasons. From my own experience of last 30 years of building various businesses, I think if somebody should do it at all, they should do it only for the value add. Otherwise, they are not doing it right for the women. It cannot be done because you are complying. You're not doing because you want to have equality. You got to do it because there is value. From my many experiences in the past, starting very small businesses, I have often looked at recruiting women specifically for roles where I have seen that there is a significant attention to detail that was required. I have found many hires I have done extremely lacking. Fast forward to today, one of my businesses which is in learning, my group CFO is a girl. I wouldn't say girl, she's a woman, she's about 40. From XLRI, well educated. When she came on board about 7-8 months ago, I know the amount of things that she had to get through. She would often come to me and I was the shoulder on which she could cry on because we had a lot of people in the organization. She was coming into a very mature organization in a very significant role. She came as a group CFO. Last 8 months when I look back, I'm not even sure how I survived for the last 30 years without somebody like her on my side. She has done an incredible job, wears multiple hats. I don't even know how she does it. So I'll just give you some of the examples. So I have a lot of people in finance who are like 55, 60 years old, very senior members, chartered accountants. Her husband is a chartered accountant. So she used to keep telling me, Suresh, the way I manage them, I pose the same question to my husband at home. And then I know how he reacts. And then I sort of use the same thing to work with these people in the office. It took her quite some time. It took quite some time for the people around her to accept her as a person, not as a woman or a man or anything, as a person who is significantly qualified, who can add so much value to the work that we were doing. But I think we are almost 90% done. We are almost 90% done, at least as far as my business is concerned. And hence, it's just an introduction, is what you said. I think people should do it, not because it is regulatorily required, not because it makes them look good in society or in their business circle. They should do it because they are losing out if they are not. That should be the primary reason they should do it.
Switching from company to boards, I thought it would be a nice segue if you were to weigh in on how women have actually gone up in the boards and what is the advantage.
I think Suresh touched upon it. And I'll talk India. I've spent most of my career here. Right now on the boards, I think the whole thing has started with the regulation. And there is a school of thought and there is certain data, if you were to go with the research, to say has that been a good idea? Because it's the same argument. There's always the pros and cons of the quota system anywhere you talk about it. And I think all of us have grown up in times where we've all had different set of emotions on the matter. And this does sound like one of them. So to me, I think 2013, so almost a decade now of that regulation. And then we were given some time to get women in, etc., etc. And then everybody was running around to find those handful of women, and then those handful of women became very busy because they were the ones, there's an old girls network like the old boys network. And then you realized, there are more companies and then the mandate on how many boards you can be on, etc., etc., etc. So to me, I think the intent is right. You put the women at the top and let the trickle-down effect happen. The result, to me, isn't as encouraging, because I think there's a lot more than just saying get the women there and they will mentor, they will network and build that whole network, and they will advocate for women. It's all well intended, but translating it in the midst of a society that has been used to working in a different way is not straightforward. If I go from the boards to the next level, which is the leadership, again, there's no quota there. Companies are free to choose unless driven by shareholders or stakeholders. And I'm not sure how many shareholders are today driving that. Everybody's talking, so you go to an AGM, you will be questioned on where are the women. So that obviously that director sitting on the chair helps, because there's that woman over there, and okay, now let's move on. I think it's sometimes actually had a negative impact also, because it just says, I think I've ticked that box, so should be okay for now. And then you expect that women, despite the majority being in a different, I'll just call it a perspective, because I think diversity is all about perspective. So the majority is with a perspective. Assuming gender brings in a different perspective as one way of looking at diversity, think about how much is that diversity able to make a difference and influence in a boardroom discussion on driving leadership appointment with more women. You've got this one woman in probably a board of 8 to 10, all of whom have been there for years together, mostly coming through the network, etc. It's a long journey ahead. So to me, if you have leaders, women leaders, they become role models. Do directors become role models? It's like, it's like that thing out there, So most women who enter the workforce would rather look at leadership who's at the helm of execution, as CXOs, CEOs, etc., and see that there is a path to that. That, to me, is a much stronger force to make a difference than just putting quotas and getting women out there. That's my thought.
Wow. So much to unpack in what you just said, especially between board and the leadership part. Now, let me just go a different direction towards education. And both these women are women of science. One has gone to the dark side. She has gone to the, I'm just sorry. She's gone to the company side, and where she's heads the Apollo Preventive Care. And the other person is in the academia. And I'd like to ask the two of you how this journey started as, when you were youngsters going into science, and then evolved into your respective roles where you are still fighting some of these battles. Sathya first and then.
So I always loved the human body. Growing up, biology was my favorite subject. I was in the first bench in the biology class. Only one who would occupy the first bench, by the way. And was absolutely fascinated by the human brain even more so. I still think that the day I held the human brain in my hands tops even the day I held my firstborn, right? So that's how much I actually am fascinated by the brain, because I think it manages everything we do. It really therefore struck me when my grandmother was diagnosed with Alzheimer's disease. And I saw 14 years of my favorite grandparent move from someone I loved and would do everything with to, not even knowing herself. And that pushed me to study what happens in that brain. And that was my research thesis around neurodegeneration. And somewhere along that path, though, of spending 5 years in the lab, I realized that I actually miss being around people. And I missed some of the pace at which I wanted to do things, and that was much more natural for me as a person. And when I finished my PhD, I had a choice to make, and at that point I said, listen, let me just give something else a shot, take a break and see if I really miss this enough to want to come back to it. And at that point, I had an opportunity to work for McKinsey, a consulting company that seemed to value what I would bring to the table across from a number of MBAs. And that just fascinated me. And so we'd go in and work with a number of healthcare clients where I was a scientist and was able to communicate with, say, the doctors or the people who understood the medical language, and then I would learn on the job on the business side. And then over time, over many, sort of a jungle gym of a little bit of a career, I'm actually delighted to be able to bring both sides of the human body that I love and the business side of what I actually enjoy quite a bit, to be able to have more scalable impact at work. So for me, it's the dark side perhaps for some, but I've actually been able to bring two aspects to do more.
I've always wanted to be in science. Science and math were everything for me growing up. And of course, as I mentioned, I come from a family of teachers and professors. So this is also my known space comfort zone for sure. So this is where I was going to be. I think I said it in maybe 8th standard or so that I want to be a professor. And so that's the reason, and I'm glad. I mean, as I also said, I'm extremely privileged, and I've had the good fortune to actually materialize those dreams that I had when I was young. In terms of, fighting the good fight for gender equity and so on, I really don't, I most of the time don't think of it like that. We are human beings. We are in this space with you all, and you just want to make a difference, do the right thing. And if somebody is not doing the right thing, I think it's incumbent upon me to call that out. That's all I think.
And how is the space changing as students come in, get their PhDs? How are they thinking about these career paths, be it a professional, like in your industry or in academia? How is that changing, and what do you see as a good steps that institutions like IITs are doing?
Thank you. That's a good question for me, I think. Definitely the numbers of people, men and women, getting PhDs is increasing. And as an institution, I can speak very long and confidently about IIT Madras. We are also moving away a little bit to focus more on research and so on as we evolve as an institution. And I think there's a ton of opportunities that are being created by, of course, wonderful people like you that run companies, and also within academia as institution, as just the field matures in our country. So I think it's a fantastic time for young people to be studying at all levels, including PhDs. I think maybe when we did our PhD more or less around the same time, we probably took a little dip in what our earning potential could be by doing a PhD. But now it's not. I don't think that's the case. It's not only about the earning potential, it's also about the kind of interesting, challenging opportunities that are accessible to people. So it feels very good right now, I would say.
Fantastic. And you're in companies like where you work, Apollo, what are the programs that are being done to bring this gender equity?
So interestingly, in the healthcare industry in general, right, there are actually a reasonable number of women in what I'm going to call the medical side. So if you think about nurses, you think about doctors, you will actually find a reasonably good ratio. Nurses are young, very young. The average age is around 20 something. And then very few of them actually continue on. But if you look at our company, actually the ratio of women is actually pretty good when you combine all of the different skill sets. And then if we transition to the business side of things, the administration, so to speak, then it drops to 7-8%. And I think that I always wonder why, right? Again, the nursing side, it's young, so the 20s, early 20s, large population, high churn, they make it work. It's a great step-up opportunity at that time and an earning opportunity for many families. The doctors, I think there's a number of them actually that pace it out and have some flexibility, depending on the specialty that they choose, right? And so if you become specialty agnostic, then the flexibility actually allows them to create their own practice. They're almost entrepreneurs, individual entrepreneurs is the way I think about them. And that flexibility allows them to stay in the workforce. On the flip side, not just Apollo, but other companies that I've been at, when it comes to business side of things, it actually does get very, very challenging. And at least the way I have observed others and then thought about it for myself is 3 stages of life, right? The first stage where you're young, energetic, nothing holds you back, and I love coming back to campus week on week and seeing that kind of energy amongst the youth, and nothing holds them back. They don't even understand what I'm talking about when I say you have to slow down at some point, right? And it's actually very refreshing. At that time, those 20s, please accelerate. Do everything you can. Go out and really get the best jobs that you want, and you have the opportunity today. And so go do that. And then there'll be a stage in the midlife, right? That family, because of physiologically who we are, that family takes a little bit of a precedence. How many years you're in midlife and put family in precedence depends on you and a number of factors. And then I think that there's what I'm going to call loosely post-children and high school phase, right? Where they get extremely independent. It's hard to deal with initially, but it's great because suddenly you have a whole bunch of time freed up. And then potentially if you have the energy and passion and the right set of considerations, then you can accelerate again. And so thinking about your own life like that, and I hope that corporates increasingly will think about, therefore, how they can create opportunities for people to be supported and in flexi roles during that midlife, so that when the time is right again for them to be able to accelerate into the senior roles, I think is very important.
That's a great way of dividing the whole space. And now back to you. How do you manage to keep those numbers in your workforce? What is the secret sauce of having so many women in your company and also be able to retain most of them?
I wish I could tell that we have 50-50 in terms of women, men. We don't. We are probably at about 27-28% the last time we checked. And what we are finding is on specific type of functions, the percentages are much more. And for some specific functions, it's a lot less. I think some of my observations, hearing people talk on this panel, I'm just giving you my sense and my perspective. I don't necessarily think that way. So I have 2 women directors in my board. They are there because of what they are. They are there not because they are women. One of them is in my audit committee. She is the secretary of the South India Regional Council of Chartered Accountants. Extremely well qualified. I don't think I could have got anybody better, irrespective of the sex, to handle a role like that. and she handles immense value. I think it is also because of my own upbringing as a family. I come from a joint family. We have 6 kids at home. I see all of them as my own. We are 3 brothers, 6 kids. The eldest is a girl. And so even my own son looks up to her. And so I grew in an environment, I come from Kerala, right? So where in many cases properties pass on from mother to a daughter. So I had an extremely strong mother. And so for my niece to be the head of the next generation of the family was very obvious. And it is not that because she's a woman or she's a boy, but she was the head of the family by sheer age and being part of that generation. So I've always seen a lot of things that way. In many cases, from what I have seen, and I'll just give you an example of this extremely bright lady I have brought on board, and I've after that brought on many people under her who are all women. She has a girl who is 7 months old, and she has another child who is like 6, 7 years old. It would have been so easy for her to take time off for very right reasons. She is the hardest working, and I can say she works even harder than me. I mean, I work till like 10 in the night. She works like 2 in the morning. She's always there. She has never ever given me a reason saying, Suresh, my child is sick or I have to take him somewhere. Never. It has never come in the way of work. And from what I hear about her husband, I think she's got, instead of 2 kids, I think she's got 3 kids at home. So she manages him too. And it has never come in the way of work. I mean, we are building a business with multiple acquisitions. So she's handling 5 or 6 acquisitions at a time, talking to the legal guys, diligence guys, the big fours, the due diligence. She handles all of it and never has come back to me with saying, because of, my kid, my this, never. So I've never looked at people being a man or a woman, but being capable or otherwise. And I think that's a perspective that is lacking in many cases. People are not being recruited for what they are. Somewhere there is a bias coming, maybe we should give a bit more leeway, like she was mentioning about a quota system. I think it sometimes defeats the purpose, because from people I have seen, women who are sort of go-getters, they don't want to be seen that way. They don't want to be evaluated. Sometimes they don't want to be given quarter. They're okay taking all of it and still delivering extremely great work. And that's a perspective I've grown with. So I think it could be a bit different, but I think that's type of a step will make this very progressive. The government interventions in terms of regulations and all of that sometimes could become very counterproductive. Like she said, people will start ticking boxes, which I know for a fact that lots of them are doing. They're just ticking boxes and thinking they have done their work.
Your perspective on how to retain, especially in that middle manager level, how to prevent drop-off. Suresh has talked a very ideal scenario, and I know that life is less than ideal for a lot of women, for many reasons. So how, in such cases, do we still retain that middle manager level?
So I think the journey is from what you're talking about, recruit them, bring them in, and then keep them. And I think when organizations, so in all the cases that I have seen, when organizations begin, it's best to begin at the bottom, because then you are invested, they are invested, and when they are invested in the organization, they will make sure they are thinking the long term. Now the question comes, is the organization thinking it as a long term? And I think some of the success stories I have seen from organizations' perspectives have been, one, at very basic level, the hardware, which is around the policies, right? We started by calling them the work-life integration policies. I'm taking a particular example of an organization. 15, 20 years back, we said, okay, let's get some WLI, work-life integration policies, because we want to keep the women. And when I say work-life integration policies, okay, there's part-time work, there's flexi work, you don't need to be mandated by the government to have a creche nearby or in the facility. Let the organization be progressive enough to do that. There are times where you may need to take an extended period of time off because there's somebody to be taken care of. May not be a child, maybe a parent, maybe anybody, maybe you yourself needed it as a break. So to me, we start with that, get the policies in place. Then comes a whole organization that needs to be trained to implement those policies. It's, I mean, my blood boils is too dramatic, but like I had an instance. So, you know, when COVID happened, everybody naturally went to work from home, which until then was a work-life integration policy, right? So there were progressive organizations who were already thinking work from home, at least for people who were not on the shop floor, because if you're on the shop floor, difficult to figure out how you can give them this option. But yes, then you look into, okay, do I change roles for this person, etc., etc. So here comes an organization which post-COVID said, you know, we've gotten a way where we've learned to work from home when the circumstance so requires. So I have a meeting at the school for my child. And I mean, honestly, just being very practical, this happens. Happens with me, happens with my husband, happens with everybody. Today you go, today I can't go, kind of a discussion. And there are some days none of us go, some days both of us go. But anyways, so we said, let's continue with this. It's a good practice. It is what makes us a great place to work, right? GPTW, for those, you know, we love to get those certifications, call ourselves out, employer branding and all of that. And here comes this lady, coincidentally it's a lady, who complains all the way to me. So she's obviously gone through the whole ladder, which was not supportive when she said, I need to take my mother for a checkup at certain intervals this week. So there may be days in this week where I need to work from home because I'm spending 2 hours coming to office, 2 hours going back from office. That 4 hours can be saved. I have a lot of work to do. So this is a person well intended. She's saying, I can't take leave because I have work to do. I have a ton of leave. So can I work from home on those days? By the way, if there are meetings, I'll work across the schedule on my mother's checkup. And guess what? The answer is no. If you need to do this, do it for a day. I can't allow you to do this for a week. Take leave if you need to. And here's this individual who's worried that her work will suffer. She wants to do work, but then out of frustration, other than going on Naukri.com and starting looking for another job because she's so frustrated with this manager who doesn't see, she's just worried that her work is going to lag because she's not going to do it just out of frustration because somebody didn't value the fact that she said, I'll make myself available when I need to. Right? So to me, besides putting policies, guidelines, there's this whole organization that needs to be trained. And this is where, you know, from just doing the numbers, it goes into the whole space. And this is, of course, where inclusion also comes in, but not to diverge over there. It is about training everybody to say this is okay to do. I said it was coincidentally a woman because it could have been a man. And like while we all love to see people as resources, as professionals, this does come up. I mean, would it have been a man who would have made this request? I don't know. And I think that journey has not yet been taken, where a lot of men think it's okay to make this request because they have a duty to fulfill, which they want to fulfill. So to me, the whole middle management is not just about getting the policies, but also training everybody across levels, anybody who's a manager, not an individual contributor, to say there are ways to work around this. Focus on the results, not on the FaceTime, not on, you know, who's put in the effort to just show up before you reached over there or stayed back until after you left. That's just one part of it.
Good example, very relatable. Thank you. I think we are almost out of time. I just want to ask one very brief question. How do we role model in our roles? We have all accepted, we are very privileged. How do we do the role modeling for any youngster, regardless of gender?
I don't know. I think just be myself, bring my heart and passion into everything I do, work hard, which is anyway what I love to do, I'm sorry to say. But I think just be myself, because it's very hard to, I'm almost 50, it's very hard to change myself now, I think. I'm sure there are people that will get inspired and appreciate me for what I do. So that's what I've done.
In that order, do you
want to think some more? One of the things I try and embody as much as possible is preventive health. It's what I stand for and I love doing every day. So I try to role model around having me time. Again, it's gender agnostic, but having me time is very important. Whether it is a 5-minute cup of coffee in the morning, a 10-minute lunch break where I shut the door and I eat my lunch in peace, or it is a run in the morning, depending on who you are, find your me time. It clears your head. It gives you your energy to get through all the things that you can do and more.
Great. So I think for me, role modeling is just being very real. Like you said, you can't change yourself, but I just try to be real. So the example that I just spoke about was probably me sometime back. It's probably me on a regular basis if I need to be somewhere with somebody who matters. And I make sure I let people know that yes, I'm doing this, or I'm not available because I need to get to my daughter's school, much as she doesn't want me there. But just being real, I think, is role modeling.
It's a lot of role modeling.
So just being real, I think, is role modeling enough, because I think sometimes we just become very humble. We just say, okay, yeah, we somehow managed, and don't let them know how much of a struggle it was to go through this whole thing, and the number of times in the day you'll have a heartburn because of some bias that comes across, because it comes across very regularly, irrespective of what role, what industry, what company, what nationality you are. It all happens, and I think just telling people it happened and that it bothered you lets them know, irrespective of what you've achieved, it still happens, so it's okay. We are good.
Thank you. That was beautiful. I'd love to open up this for some audience.
I was so happy she missed me. So for me, the role model is, at least in terms of what I stand for, and I ensure every day I keep doing, is I like to push boundaries. My question always is why not, rather than why it has to be that way. And the second one is, and that's something that's very important for me, and I keep emphasizing to a lot of people, you need to stand up for what you believe in. It is so easy in context of group discussions, even in a board meeting, in a collective environment, that there could be some strong alpha personalities who sort of emphasize and put their foot down and talk loud and intervene at every step. You just, you could be very quiet, but you got to stand up if you think something happening right to you is not sitting well with you. I emphasize this to a lot of people. So stand up for what you truly believe in. Never let somebody do anything around you that you think is not right. Even if it's okay to walk out of the room. And keep pushing boundaries. So.
Sorry again. We'll open up the audience for questions.
Postdoc, now a principal investigator, and I know a lot of friends of mine are going to the middle phase of their life. doing PhDs and postdocs. And then we go through kids and family, right? And we don't have enough gender neutralization capacities here. Like when I was in Europe, you have a child care facility that you could go to. And we had a beautiful conference in Bangalore where there was child care grants, so mothers could bring. So would that be something? Child care grants, irrespective of the role, that both parents could work. Child care facilities and grants and subsidies. Maybe is that a policy even being discussed? Because we talk about humanizing, that's one human problem that everybody goes through, right?
It's a good point. There's already a mandate that organizations above a certain size have to have accessible, I mean, creche facilities that are convenient for all their employees. We've also been talking, at least in academia, we're talking very frequently now about running conferences and giving that, we don't even need to call it a child care grant. It's for women especially, I know that's probably not going to sit well with this panel, but for women especially, there's a no questions asked additional financial grant that many conferences are giving. It's not become universal, but to answer your question, is that being talked about? Yes, very much.
But the capacity of the creche or the child care system that we have is just not enough. We just have schools and play schools, and that's just not enough. And we do not have paternity leave for father. And I understand from the company's point of view, they need to keep making, but we are sufficient in terms of the number of citizens we have in the country. But if you go to Finland, they have very less people, so they like make more kids. That we have enough kids here, but there's no system to support it.
I just want to make two small points. So I think there's a beginning. So let's give credit to the beginning to begin with. Because ironically, just before I came in here, I was talking to one of my my juniors from the Indian Institute of Management, and he brought up the same question, and that's when I learned that these grants are being provided. And I actually shared a personal experience when my daughter was 2 years old. Every time I used to travel, we were 4 people who traveled, my parents, my daughter and me. And no, the company did not obviously pay for that. I was the only one who was paid for, and everything else was my personal choice. Obviously made a hole in the pocket, but it was a choice I made because, and I think on hindsight, if I had somebody similar, would I at least pay for one more person as the MD of the company? Would I authorize that? The answer is yes. At that point in time, 15 years ago, I don't think I even thought it was something I should demand, forget about commanding. So we have come a long way for you to be able to ask that question. So thank you.
But we can train professionals. Like I'm talking about capacity building in childcare, right? So that's we do not even have to go on for that. That's all I'm talking about.
So, I mean, the creche facilities in India in general are not as good as anywhere else.
Or even the capacity, like do we even have professionals that are there are not even certifications.
I can talk from a corporate perspective. I wouldn't be able to comment from an academic, like an institute perspective, but yes, when one of the organizations I was associated with decided to set up a creche facility, we as a leadership team would actually review the kind of capability and capacity, how many people, eligible population could possibly need. And then when we started running out of capacity, I mean, literally we were discussing menu and food and how many nannies are there and is there a teacher coming in and what are the facilities, is it safe? We in fact used to cover incidents over there under our HSE, you know, because that's as far as organizations can take it if the intent is there. Of course, the mandate is there, organizations of above a certain size need it, but it can be done. But it's the same thing we talked earlier, no? If you just tick the box, then you'll have the capability and capacity issue.
Just to add, and this is just the entrepreneur in me talking. I mean, you've been talking of a problem as a challenge. I've been looking at it as a business opportunity. I know of this company in Delhi which made a very significant start in setting up creches near corporates and charging for it. Very successful. Obviously, I'm sure like you were saying, There aren't enough trained, certified people. There aren't organizations to provide this training in the first place, let alone certify people. And in a country, like you said, where we have so many kids, this is a humongous opportunity waiting to be tapped. I mean, somebody like you, I would have said, you should be the one, who understands this problem to be talking to the incubation cell right here, building out something. I mean,
Thank you. Yes.
Thank you for the insights. You know what's running in my mind? I wish I can clone him more. That's what is running in my mind, because having been in the industry for 28 years and having seen quite a lot, right? I get to see leaders with this perspective very, very less. I'm being very brutally honest, right? So Bhavana brought about a very important point around training. I would just like to extend this a bit, right? There is quite a lot that is being done around metrics. Obviously, it irritates me because everywhere I go, right, I don't want to report to a CEO because I don't want to be his KPP, because I'm not there for the sake of gender diversity or whatever it is. I want to be recruited for my skills, because I tell people when executive search firms reach out to me, I tell them, don't reach out to me for the song and dance. I'm not here for that. If you find me competent for the skills, talk to me, because this has been a mantra which I've been using for the last 3-4 years. It's very, very irritating to say that, actually. From whatever I heard from your perspective and the alignment that I saw, right, to extending this a bit, right, she brought about a very important point around conscious and unconscious bias. Let me extend this a bit and call it as a mental model shift, where she had put it as training. How much of it is that you do in your organization really to shift the mental model of that senior management folks that you have in your organization? We talk a lot about equity, we talk a lot about gender diversity, we talk a lot about that. But if I really see in the real life, right, I hardly see anything working around the mental model of these senior management guys and top management guys whom I work with. I have this brutally honest feedback to all my D&I organizations, but I have not seen anything being done so far. So have you really seen anything like that in your organizations? I would like to hear that. Would be very encouraging to know that there is something out there.
So I talked about the work-life integration policies. So coincidentally, or maybe because I was the most demanding for those policies, I was the one who ended up sponsoring them for the organization, which basically meant, bad idea on hindsight. I think I needed a male counterpart with me on that one. But so what happened was, in order to get them ingrained, me and the D&I colleague that was there to support me, because I didn't know policy from Adam over there, we went from location to location, spending time with the leadership team. So we were spread across locations. So we spent time with leadership team at each location. The thought being, this had to start at the top. And if the leadership could role model it, everybody down below would do it. The way to do those was, of course, we introduced that these are the policies, these are the guidelines. This is how they will actually, so we took case studies. We told them this is how it could actually happen. And then pushed them to think on what could be the various scenarios, questions, doubts that could come up. Did we solve everything? No, I think we just started with creating a little mind space that this is a possibility. It took years to get an organization where we had very limited complaints about how, though the policies are in place, the manager doesn't know how to implement them. But it took a few years to shift that needle, and several cases to keep coming all the way to the top to say, okay, how should this problem be handled and how can we move the needle on this one? So yes, that has happened in an instance because I was personally doing it. Is it sustainability being one? Is it pervasive? The answer is no. In fact, I have a different problem. How many people are actually capable of doing such trainings? Because they are so nebulous, and because the number of simulated circumstances is so endless, at the end of the day, you do have to rely on the manager to be able to execute this. And that is, like you said, if we clone Suresh, maybe we can make happen.
So the honest answer is I haven't seen any trainings formally in this space. I also agree that it's very hard to, especially adults, we learn very differently, and so you actually have to think about the training very hard. I'd like to come at it a slightly different way and unfortunately this is hard to scale, is one person at a time, right? It's, I don't hire for numbers, obviously, but it ends up being that wherever I go, my teams end up being 60-70% women. And I actually have to ask HR to send me male resumes as a priority. And I think perhaps it comes down to, and I go back to recruiting and recruiting at all levels, right? And also reinforcing sort of how to look for competence. I mean, the biggest reason that we have the panel like this today is because a good amount of the workforce or talent out there isn't being tapped. That's it, right? It's hard to find talent for a job you need done. And if you're not tapping the full 100% potential talent out there, then it's going to be harder and harder to get talent. And women are half the population, so half the talent. And so it's recruiting, I think, is an important aspect. So you get more women, and then you do one at a time. And it's not scalable. But right now, I don't see enough of it. And I do think trainings on that front, it's just, I can almost picture a whole bunch of senior male leaders walking in saying, oh God, we have an unconscious bias training today. And I think the purpose of that whole thing is lost because of the mindset they bring to the table to that training. Yeah. So I don't see the point of even organizing something like that today. Yeah, or, you know, clones, right?
Sorry, I have a funny story to tell you. So it wasn't a formal training, I don't think, but we said gender awareness. We need this, and who needs it more in IIT Madras? The top, you know, like the director and deans need it, and the heads of the department need it the most. So obviously, like a whole bunch of old men. So we captured them in a room, and we started with gender is a social construct. And it sort of stopped over there because they couldn't wrap their minds around this concept itself that, you know, madam, how can you say that? So it went like that for about, I mean, they're very nice people, and I'm sure that aside from the sort of the blind spots that they have, they can do a good job with things. But it's very hard, and you're absolutely right. Even in academia, we need to start over there and really maybe one at a time, get more of us over. It's not to say that if women are over there, they would automatically accept these concepts and that they'd be aware and they'd be caring, etc. But I don't know if that's true. I don't have, of course, a control experiment having been done in academia because it's very lopsided, extremely male-dominated at the top especially.
I'm a social worker, so I'm not from this IIT. I work with the less privileged families almost 25 years now. One thing I noticed in all of four of you, your family background. You have a family which supports. So this gender equity is not about education, not about successful having a good family. That's my question now. Is that the one? Because I saw all of you. You know, I believe that actually. I support my wife, I support my daughter. I think it will start from the family. That's what I understand. That's my question to all of you also, I think.
I think you made the statement absolutely right. I have nothing but to agree with you. There's a whole value system we get brought up with. And that comes from the family because those are, in most privileged cases, the closest people that are there to you. And if that value system is right, whether it's hard work, discipline, pushing the envelope, caring, going, you know, believing in potential, all of those, I mean, those, what I just stated are some things which I saw in my value system, and I think that is what shapes. In fact, it's not just about the family, that has brought you up, but also later on when you make your family and you have a spouse, how supportive is that spouse? And I know a lot of people who may have come up with the privilege, but later on with the mindset that they have with their spouse, it's a bit of a different journey, or vice versa. Sometimes it works the other way around. So nothing but agreement with what you said. That's right.
Yeah, I work with children in the school, especially our school is situated in a urban slum. And I understand it's so important to start from small, from the school. Knowingly, unknowingly, we put the seeds of the girls are not capable. Or like, for example, like I was talking to my teachers, if you want to lift the desks, whom will you call? You think boys come. Or like even the mothers, when we make the statements, if the girl is going out, take your brother and go. So I'm saying it has to start from families, and it has to start from schools. And I think it is so deep-rooted. Like when we had in pre-KG, when we had this Montessori activity, where a boy had to pick up a sawdust from the tray. And the boy refused to do it when we had a school in village. He felt that a sweeping job is a girl's job, and he would never do that activity. And we kept noting it, and he did not do that activity for months. And then we realized that all the women were teachers, and then we had to have the one of the male staff come and do that activity for the child. And then he thought, okay, that's an activity I can do. So this is what we are seeing in pre-KG toddlers. So I don't know, this gender equality, equity, it's like going back to our own families and houses, and it's a very deep thing that we need to start from the ground. That's what I believe. And the reason that's why I came here today, because that's something I want to build in our children, girls and boys, to work together. And so thank you so much. Today's session was beautiful.
I actually wanted to touch upon one point that you brought up that I think we missed today, which is around security, right? We talked about capabilities, competence, and things that hold us back. But security for me is one of the areas that actually I'm personally dealing with. To have to tell my 12-year-old why she can't go alone, but my son, when he was 12, was allowed to go alone, is a hard conversation to have. And when she says, why, tell me why. The men who were in those roles never thought about it. But when a junior woman traveled, she had to stay in that hotel. And so she called me from there, right? So went all the way up and said, this is where I'm staying. I said, no, it's okay. Just get yourself out, hopefully call the driver back, and go find a hotel, and I'll sign off on that expense. But it goes a long way, and I think safety comes in the way as well of advancement, especially when you're not as privileged and at different kinds of companies as well.
I just had one small, I completely hear you, and it's totally true, and lots of work to be done. But to go back to role modeling that Malti asked me before, what I can role model is being extremely supportive of my husband's choices. And that's what I do. So whatever in terms of his life and his career decisions that he makes, I try and be extremely supportive of him as I expect him to be of me.
Thank you. With that equity that starts right there, starts probably at the childhood level, and hopefully we build a society which thinks like that. I'll close here. Thank you so much.